Welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters, and I am your host, Dane Waters, as always. I'm honored to be coming to you today from the United States, from New York. So let's talk quickly about the headlines around the world. There's been this movement in the United States, many people call it political retribution by Donald Trump against those people that he doesn't like. He went against his former head of the FBI, Comey, and also the former Attorney General of New York, Letitia James. Grand jury testimony, supposedly. The grand jury came and indicted them. But late yesterday, the judge in the case dismissed it, claiming that the prosecutor was illegally appointed by Trump. So we'll have to see. I don't think he's going to just let that go. So I believe that you're going to see continued efforts by Trump to go after those that he just doesn't like. It's in his DNA. He just has to do it. So that's interesting. What's happening around the world? We see that the original 28-point, the new 28-point peace plan that Trump put forward for Ukraine. I mean, honestly, personally, I thought it was hideous and heinous in every single way. I clearly felt and believed, like many people, that it benefited Russia. But one thing it did do is that it prompted additional discussions between the United States and Ukraine and the European allies to talk about um, peace and what should happen. But the reality is that, I do see this as a fool's errand because I don't think Russia is going to agree to anything. Even if they wrote the whole agreement themselves, I don't think they're going to agree to it because they're making headway on the battlefield. So we'll have to see how that comes out. But that is a major, I think this is the last push. I think that if this peace deal or involvement of the United States in this peace deal doesn't come to fruition, I really do believe that the United States will pull out. And I'm of the personal opinion that Ukraine can survive just fine without the United States. I think too much stock is being put into the United States being necessary to win the war. I think the European Union and the UK can get their act together, and they're getting their act together in order to support Ukraine and defend their European countryside. I think that they can do that. What else? One other quick thing, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's surprising that she has resigned from Congress as of middle of next month. She was one of the most vitriolic, I would say honestly, nasty human beings on the planet when it comes to how she handled herself. But she's mellowed and she's leaving, so I'm not exactly sure why. But the reality is that is a kind of, I think, a bellwether about what possibly could be happening to MAGA. I think that it could be waning, and we'll have to see what happens. Anyway, so we'll just leave it at that. By the way, Bolsonaro down in Brazil suddenly had some kind of psychedelic episode and tried to take off his ankle bracelet. At least that's what he tries to say. But he's about to go to prison for 27 years for planning a coup. I'm still waiting for Donald Trump to send SEAL Team 6 down there to break him out. So that's my prediction today. Well, he'll probably be living next door to me in the United States. Who knows? So let's just take it from there. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with our amazing guest, and we'll get started. Thank you very much. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. Once again, I appreciate you guys being here, and I'm talking to my guest, Dr. Theo Zenou. Um, I can never say his name. Theo, welcome to the show, by the way. You've been on the show numerous times, and I don't know why you still come when I can't even properly pronounce your last name. You should just say the heck with it.
I can't pronounce my last name either, so whatever flows with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you. Truly, it is. And you look very dapper today in your fancy jacket there. So, you dressed up for the occasion. Unlike me, I put a turtleneck on today, so that means I dressed up. So let's get talking about, yeah, it's the death penalty. I don't know how to jump into this. Somebody was asking me last night, why am I doing a show on the death penalty? And it's an interesting question. Why? And I think it's because, I was watching a movie not too long ago. It's about the first female serial killer in the United States, and how she admitted that she did all the killings and she wanted to be put to death. But the frustrating thing was she admitted to it, wanted to be put to death, but it still took her several years to put her to death. But she also talked about how the death penalty wasn't a deterrent and all this kind of stuff. So we'll talk about that. But let's get started with, what do you think about the death penalty?
I'm personally opposed to the death penalty for really a moral and ethical principle, which is that nothing gives the state the right to take away someone's life in a modern democratic society, or really in any kind of modern society. There is no place for a practice like the death penalty. If somebody has committed an unforgivable crime, then they should be sentenced to jail for the rest of their life. But what gives the state the legitimacy to commit a very similar crime to the one that is punishing?
Okay. Well, we can go so many directions on this. So I guess you automatically believe that the death penalty, I mean, in the United States, people support the death penalty because they see it as a deterrent. So you don't see that there's any, putting aside your personal beliefs about the death penalty, do you believe the death penalty is a deterrent in any way to people committing crime?
It doesn't seem like it is. And there are really two data points we can refer to here. One is look at societies that do have the death penalty, say in the US, for instance, and specific states in the US that have it, they don't have lower crime rates than states that don't have it. And then when scientists have actually studied this question, they've not found evidence that the death penalty in any way, shape, or form deters violent crime, which is really what we're talking about here. So it makes no substantial material difference to the level of crime in a society. So there is also practical reasons to oppose it. Here's one. Another one is, and this has happened many times in the US, is the justice system tries to be perfect, but it's not perfect. And sometimes individuals are convicted for murder when they didn't commit the murder. And they're sentenced to death row. And in certain cases, they've been put to death when later on evidence came to the fore that they were innocent. So even if one were to look at it simply in an agnostic, practical manner, the stakes are too high to simply be cavalier about it.
Well, it's interesting you say that about the United States because I was doing some reading up on this issue, and it turns out that they estimate that 1 out of every 8 people on death row are innocent. And that since I think it was 73, that over 200, since 1993, over 200 people have been found innocent who were on death row because of the use of DNA and other, people recanting their stories or whatever. So you're right, people do end up on death row that are innocent. And it is an issue. I mean, for me personally, to be very clear, I'm fundamentally opposed to the death penalty, except I was talking to people last night about this, and the reality is I think that if somebody harms a child, they should be put to death. It's just one of those things. I think if you're willing to harm a child, you should be put to death. But my belief in a death penalty has nothing to do with it being a deterrent, because I doesn't think it deters anything. I don't think people who are predisposed to go murder is going to think, "Oh, I'm not going to murder because I may be put to death." I just don't think that's the case. But let's talk about it specifically in the UK. What's going on with with the death penalty issue in the UK?
So the death penalty has been abolished in the UK for most charges since the early 60s, and then for treason to the crown since the 90s. So there is no death penalty in the UK. However, there are calls for the return of the death penalty, which is even more worrying when a society is accepted to move on, and then he's saying, wait, maybe the death penalty was a great thing after all. When you look at polls, a slight majority of people in Britain support reinstating the death penalty. And strangely enough, the younger generations, Gen Z, is most in support of a return to the death penalty out of anyone in the country. Now, what has prompted this return of the death penalty to the fore is in the summer of 2024, in a city in England called Southport, there was stabbing. A man stabbed several young girls to death. It obviously shocked the nation. And so the populist right and the far right has done what is essentially a very cheap, political trick, and to say, well, let's put him to death and let's bring back the death penalty, and that's how we'll deal with a serious crime, which is not how things, as you've pointed out, ever really happen, but which can succeed electorally in order to appear tough. And in one case, there was a sitting MP who put a photo of a noose on Twitter
Hmm.
and said, let's bring back the death penalty. So this is the other issue, that the politics of the death penalty are deeply fraught and usually unleash something incredibly vicious and toxic in public life. And it's a bit like a medieval culture where suddenly everybody, is calling to burn the witches at the stake. And that's not healthy for society. We have a problem with crime, sure, but we have ways to deal with this problem firmly without needing to debase ourselves in the process.
So your whole thought is about that it's just morally reprehensible, the death penalty, right? I mean, it's okay. Well, I'm going to play the religion card here. God hasn't always been the nicest human being, when it comes to punishment. And in the Old Testament, he was kind of a mean guy. So, I mean, he turned people into pillars of salt, and it's not like he was. Well, I'm saying he, whoever she is. My female audience is going to come say you could be a female, but whatever gender or non-gender God is, in the Bible there are examples where it was acceptable for people to be put to death. I mean, how do you? So if in the Bible it believes it's okay, why is it morally wrong for people like you?
Because one, I do not think the Bible is the beginning and the end of human civilization and the thinking about human ethics. But even if you were to look at the Bible, you and I, our governments, are not God, do not represent the will of God. We represent the will of the society in our country or in our state. And besides, the custodian of the Bible today, whether you look at the vast majority of the Jewish rabbis or the Catholic Church or many of the Protestant churches in Europe, are opposed to the death penalty. And the Catholic Church has made this issue very important. And even last month, new Pope Leo XIV, reminded Catholics of that and said, well, if you pride yourself on being pro-life, which, as you know, many Catholics and many on the right do in the US, then you shouldn't oppose the death penalty. It's a matter of conscience as far as the church is concerned, and it's up to God to decide who dies when.
No, I fundamentally agree with that. But let's just take this to the United States. In the U.S. here, you just recently wrote an op-ed about the death penalty. So walk us through what you think is happening about the death penalty in the U.S. and your feelings about the process here.
So the death penalty is legal in 27 states in the US, most of them being the center of the country and in the South, and then a few holdover states on the West Coast. This year, there have been so far 44 executions across the US, and they were all carried out by states. That's about twice as more as last year. And this can be attributed mainly to Donald Trump. Because when Donald Trump came back into office, on the very first day he took power, he signed an executive order saying, I will restore the death penalty. Mind you, it was already in the books for many states. And I will advise states to aggressively pursue the death penalty in any case where it can apply. And I will also advise them to put to death row inmates. And so under Trump's pressure and under the pressure of the MAGA movement, we've seen Republican governors sign death warrants very quickly. And the most striking case has been Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who so far this year has put more than 15 individuals to death. It's a record in the modern state of Florida since I think the 70s. And it's a record for Ron DeSantis, who's been governor since 2019 and hasn't been particularly concerned with signing death warrants and making sure that death row inmates up until now were sentenced to death. And now all of a sudden he thinks the death penalty is great and it's a strong deterrent and we need it for justice and closure for victims. But what's really happening is Ron DeSantis is responding most likely to a signal that comes from Trump. And Ron DeSantis also has presidential ambitions and would like to lead the MAGA movement and Republicans going forward. He's made that very clear in the past. And so the death penalty has become a new badge of honor, an article of faith on the American right. Again, all down to Trump. And you will have noticed that Trump is very comfortable intervening in any kind of murder cases and saying, I think this murder suspect should get the death penalty. He done it in the case of Luigi Mangione, and now the DOJ is pursuing the death penalty. He did it in the case of a Ukrainian refugee who was stabbed to death. And before the suspect was even charged, he went on Twitter and said, this animal should be put to death and everything will be set right. And so again, this is very dangerous because it weaponizes the death penalty, to create resentment and public anger, and he approaches it like he's judge, jury, and executioner, like he's a king and he can decide what happens to people.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, but what's also interesting is that the other day that there were some Democrats who came out, members of Congress who came out with a video and talking about how, it's a totally unrelated subject here, but talks about how if you're a member of the military, you can ignore rules that you're illegal illegal things that you're told to do. That's in order to protect the country. But he came out and said that was treason and they should be put to death. So his whole thing is about killing people. But what's weird about that is that he's also says he's the champion of the Christians, and that and a large percentage of his base is made up of Christians. And so here you are, you're saying, and I agree with you. I'd just say you were saying. So the Christian base is supposedly supposed to be, if they follow the edicts of the religion, hey, the death penalty shouldn't be there. Yet they're saying we want it to be there. So you have a guy, who believes in Christianity and wants to follow the faith, and yet says we need to put everybody to death. So, no, it's scary actually, to be honest with you. And what do you think is going to happen in the United States? It will help us understand this. I mean, I should be able to explain this, but you can explain it better, I'm sure. So there's no national law about the death penalty. Every individual state gets to choose whether they have the death penalty, correct?
Yes, and the death penalty is also legal at the federal state. So when the US government, the Department of Justice, decides to prosecute murder cases, in certain instances where capital punishment is applicable, they can also decide to pursue a capital punishment sentence for someone. And Trump has made it very clear that that's what he wants the DOJ to do systematically for all cases applicable. It doesn't matter the nuance of the case. No. Across the board, the death penalty. And he also wants the death penalty for any undocumented immigrant charged with murder and for anyone killing a cop.
Mm. Well, also just so the audience understands that the number one country that uses the death penalty is China, right? Yes. China, it's an authoritarian state, and so if you look at it, I really do believe, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I really do believe Donald Trump wants to be an authoritarian, wants to be, well, he already is, honestly. And if he follows, like you look at authoritarian states, whether it's Russia or whether it's China, North Korea, I mean, they all have the death penalty. So all the people that he wants to, and MBS, Saudi Arabia, they just put people to death. So do you believe that, throughout in Europe, I guess in the European Union, the death penalty is outlawed?
Yes, the countries of the EU have all abolished the death penalty. But now the new danger is that a Trumpian style of politics is imported in Europe and calls for the reinstatement of the death penalty, or growing louder and louder, perhaps. Now, in France, it's considered taboo, but if you look at the very far right of politics, there's one party, Eric Zemmour's party, who's saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have abolished it after all. And the National Rally has been very ambiguous on this question. A few years ago, they were saying perhaps we should revisit the question. Now they're saying, no, we don't care, this doesn't matter. But the more the far right will be empowered, the more the issue is likely to come back to the center of politics, as we're seeing it come back in the UK.
But what is it? Well, I still don't understand. I mean, do these parties, political parties, just think that make them look tougher? I mean, what is it that, okay, a simple analogy. I'm from Alabama, right? I know people like to go to NASCAR races because they want to see a car crash and someone hurt. Do people support the death penalty because they just believe people should be get hurt? They're just sick people. I mean, what is the whole basis of the death penalty and wanting to restore it? It's certainly, once again, it's not a deterrent. Um, so what do you think is the fundamental psychological reason people want to support the death penalty?
It's a desire to, very primal desire to do justice, to avenge horrible crimes, but it comes down to something that's deeply rational, right? It's the same primal instinct that makes us want to see the movie Taken and support the main character when he kills the bad guys after they've done horrible things to his daughter. But that doesn't quite escalate to the level of society, right? It might work for an individual, and it's a very understandable human desire, but that's not really the way to run a society based purely on irrational desire for revenge. And so most of the people who support the death penalty don't do it because they're bad people or because they would themselves want to carry out any execution or necessarily because they even want to see public execution, but because they believe that it will set things right
Well, I
somehow.
don't know. Well, the series The Purge is definitely supported by a lot of people. Which for
Yeah,
those of you who haven't watched The Purge, is where one night a year, your fellow man is allowed to go kill just to get it out of their system. I do think there's this primal instinct. It goes back to during the Roman times and the Colosseum, and for the world I mean, it's just not it's just not a deterrent, and it should not be put back in place. And honestly, I believe that if you really want to punish somebody, you put them in solitary confinement for the rest of their lives. I mean, that's really the greater punishment than giving them an
absolutely.
out and just putting them to death. So, okay, so Theo, we're going to have you for the next segment. So we have to take a quick break now, and we'll come back to this conversation. So thanks for being with Around the World with Dane Waters. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back. Really? Oh, well, okay. Well, we're back. Here we are. So that was a quick break. So we're back for the second segment with Dr. Theo Zenou, and we're continuing to talk about the death penalty. So we were just talking about. Why don't you talk to the audience real quick about what is Trump doing about commuting sentences? Or
Okay, so in the US, the president has a right to commute a death sentence. It's his prerogative and it's up to him alone. Now, Joe Biden was a Catholic, by the way, did not support the death penalty. And so when he got into office, he put a moratorium on death penalty to say no federal executions. And then, knowing that Trump would succeed him and what Trump was likely to do, he commuted the death sentences of over 30 death row inmates. And so now they are in prison for the rest of their life. Trump, even Trump, does not have the power to revoke that decision. It was made by another president. However, in an executive order, is ordered the following that he wants life in jail for those individuals to be extremely arduous, up to the horrible crimes they've committed. He wants to punish them. And the DOJ has transferred most of them to a jail in America that's widely known as basically the hardest one, nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. They are in solitary confinement for most of the time. And DOJ officials have basically said, yeah, we want to make their life hell. So there is a desire for revenge again that we see animated Trump's politics. Dane, at the beginning, you mentioned his campaign for retribution. And here again, there is a very nasty side to Trump where he just wants to hurt others. And his base, in many cases, emboldens him to do this.
well, I would argue that it's one thing about President Trump. Well, it's one of those things that, and we're going to talk about this when it comes to immigration, which we're going to talk about in this next segment, is that no, he likes to try to show he's tough. And honestly, if you look at some of his military action and things that he's doing, he likes to pick on people who can't kick, fight back. And so I would argue that this type of violence and what he's trying to do is his way of just saying, "I'm tough, I'm tough, I'm tough. I believe in the death penalty." And it's just, to me, it's just a sign of a very small man,
Yeah.
individual who has to who has to resort to violence or promote violence. I think the strongest people in the world are those that promote peace um, and harmony. But the reality is, and I think you would agree with this, there are bad people in the world. There are really bad people in the world, and they need to be punished. But as we were just talking about, I think putting them to death is just giving them a free out. That's not a punishment. That's just like you're giving them freedom, and it's very sad. But I do want to take and talk about immigration, specifically UK immigration, because you were talking about how reform is talking about bringing back the death penalty. And what is the correlation you think between illegal immigration um, and the discussion about restoring the death penalty in the UK? Is there a relationship there?
Not directly, no, because the discussion about restoring the death penalty in the UK came out of the Southport stabbing, and the stabbing was carried out by a UK citizen born in the UK. However, there was disinformation at the time online that said that this was an illegal immigrant, or undocumented immigrant, shall I say. But in the last few years, across UK politics, we've seen immigration raised to the top of the political agenda. It's one of, if not the most important concern for British voters. They believe that there is too much immigration in the UK and it should be restricted in some way. And Reform UK, which is really Britain's answer to MAGA, has come to the fore, is now polling at over 30%. Their leader, Nigel Farage, as of now, is tipped to become the next prime minister. The election is not tomorrow, it will be in a couple of years, but nonetheless is a bookie's favorite. And this has had a trickle-down effect on the rest of the political parties, where even the Labour Party, who's now in power, is, in order to win back voter, cracking down, as I would say, on illegal immigration, is making it harder for individuals to claim asylum in the UK, and wants to show they're tough and take the issue seriously.
Yeah, and wasn't there a couple of examples recently where, when it comes to immigrants, one of the big things where they were accidentally letting out of prison some illegal immigrants? Talk us through that and what that situation is.
So yes, there were a couple of cases where convicted criminals who were born outside of the UK were let out early from jail. This was not meant to happen. It was down to administrative errors. Eventually, the individuals were both arrested and sent back to jail after 2 days of manhunts. But this crystallized a fear that is now permeating across Britain, that the country is not safe. And in the minds of many voters on the right, that this is down to immigration.
And so what is, I know that there was recently, like in the last week or so, the Labour government came out with new, as you were talking about, uh, new rules when it comes to illegal. Because the rule was, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you're illegal, you come to the UK is going to put you up, they're going to get paid, give you food, they're going to take care of you basically. And one of the big issues is that a lot of the hotels are being taken up in certain parts with these illegals that were coming into the country. But what is the new change by Labor? Labor is suddenly trying to be tough because, as you said, immigration is a huge issue. And I should say illegal immigration. I shouldn't just say immigration, illegal immigration into the country. But what is the new change in the UK, and how does it impact immigrants wanting to come to the UK?
And you're right to differentiate between illegal immigration and then legal migration. But the right has a problem with both, really, in the UK. But let's start by illegal immigration. Well, Labour has doubled down and said they would do what any government would do, which is that if somebody comes in the UK without the right papers, they will be deported. The issue was around asylum seekers, where there were individuals fleeing war, for instance, coming to the UK, claiming asylum, and under the process of claiming asylum, they are entitled to support from the state for a certain amount of time until it is decided whether or not they can stay. And this created a lot of grief on the right, but really across the British electorate. And so labor now has pledged to make it more difficult for individuals to claim asylum in order to deter asylum seekers to come and claim asylum in the UK. Legal migration, of which I am a migrant to the UK. I came, a European citizen. I have a visa here. I believe are important for the country. And certainly, if you walk around the UK, you'll see that immigrants work in many different fields, in many different jobs. And in some cases, in industries where Britons do not work or do not want to work. We're talking about the service industry, for instance, or agriculture. It is the same in the US. Now, labor has no issue with the idea of immigrants or the idea of people from other places coming to the UK and contributing, and this is good. However, on the right, especially on the far right, there is a conflation around both illegal immigration and legal immigration. There is a sense that we don't want immigrants, we don't want people from abroad, we don't want foreigners here. They shouldn't be here. And so after Brexit, there was an influx of migrants from countries outside the EU. This is because these individuals came and they worked in the NHS and they contributed to the UK. And in many cases, they were very important because this happened during the COVID pandemic. Okay? There's just not enough younger people in the UK to get those jobs, or people who are willing to take those jobs. Now, if Nigel Farage is elected, I think he's made it pretty clear that he wants to drastically cut down on the number of people coming here, and he's looking forward to deporting as many as he can get away with, really. And this includes individuals who have a visa called indefinite leave to remain. It's basically a green card for life in the UK. So he wants to get rid of that, and he wants to reevaluate the situation of everyone holding this. So this is particularly concerning for immigrants in the UK who might find themselves deported for no other reason that a government deems it good politics.
Well, I think that's what you're seeing a lot in the United States as well, is that I think that, we're having all these ICE raids, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're just going into cities and they're just rounding people up, and it's heinous. I believe my family came to the United States. We're from Scotland and Ireland. I'm third generation American. So immigration, and I would argue that they probably were not legal immigrants when they came to the States. Immigration is an important tool, but it has to be regulated. There's no doubt about it. But I think that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in the United States, for example, and also I would argue in the UK, is that when the economy is going poorly, people are looking for reasons to say why the economy is going poorly. Why am I not able to get a job? Why? And almost inevitably, and I see this around the world, they're blaming it on immigrants coming in, or immigrants are taking my jobs, immigrants are taking my benefits, immigrants are doing this. How would you respond to that statement? Do you think that the amount of immigration or illegal immigration or even legal immigration has a negative impact on a nation's economy?
No, and in fact, according to most studies, it has a positive impact on a nation's economy. And in a globalized world with globalized flows of capital, by necessity, people will be moving around to follow those opportunities. But again, according to studies, immigration does not have a negative impact on a country's economy. However, populists will tell you that it does have a terrible impact, not just to a nation's economy, but also to its sense of self. And treated in the oldest story in the book is when you're in trouble, the easy way out is to scapegoat the other. And that's a very sure way of getting votes. It's a tried and tested playbook.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the other day I was when I was traveling in the U.S. and I know people laugh when I say I get a haircut, but I love getting a haircut and beard trim. But when I was getting a haircut, it was a guy who his family was from Turkey, but he was a natural born American citizen, but he looks Turkish, right? Yeah, and he's gotten to the point where he's just scared to walk out on the streets because it was in New York, and they're talking about that people start asking him, "Are you an American? Are you an American? Prove you're an American." So it's about how you look. And I've heard the same story in the UK, is that people who are first generation, second generation, third generation British citizens, they may look Turkish or they may look Middle Eastern, but they're British citizens, but they're afraid about people questioning whether or not they are actually British citizens. I mean, do you see? I mean, you're French. Do you ever have that issue in the UK where people think that you shouldn't belong here?
I mean, it's not happened to me personally, but certainly I think it's a very concerning climate for immigrants because fundamentally, it's not just about making sure that the immigration system works better and people will come here illegally, don't, the law is followed and they are sent back to their country in a human way. It's not about that, really. That's a pretext, but it unleashes a more generalized xenophobia, and we see this in the US, and we certainly see this on Trump's side, where anyone who's a foreigner is suddenly looked at with suspicion, and where everything is mixed together: illegal immigrants, economic migrants, people who are just children of immigrants but with themselves are American, and there is a general nastiness and animosity towards the foreigner and the figure of the foreigner.
Yeah. Well, I would argue, like in the United States, for example, here's the thing, like, I don't know, tell me if this is in the UK. If your parents are immigrants or like from another country and you are born in the UK, do you get automatic UK citizenship? Does it work that
Yes,
way there?
you
Okay,
need to
same in the
buy
United
the
States. And people want to change that, but I would argue that probably 90% of the people who want to change don't realize that their ancestors came to the United States as immigrants and they are American citizens because their parents or grandparents were born there. But let's talk specifically about, there's a large audience. This show is listened to in 64 countries around the world. So when it comes to coming to the UK, I mean, there is a lot of hesitation about going to the United States. Whether you're legal or not, you're just concerned about going. Should people like Nigerians and others be concerned about coming to the UK, in your opinion?
They should be concerned about their ability to stay in the UK long term if Nigel Farage gets in government. Because even if they come with a visa and with a work visa, um, that visa could be revoked from them. I think Farage has made it clear that he wants to enter a phase of mass deportations, and anyone's visa status is up to be reconsidered at any time. So of course, people should always follow the law, and should always immigrate when they have a job or to study. But it will become more and more difficult to do that and to capture that opportunity because the business community might very well want people from anywhere in the world because they want the best people for the job. They will be deterred to hire individuals where they need to sponsor them for a visa because it is costly, it will take time, and they know that could ultimately be refused by the government. And if you're willing to invest in an individual, do you want to take the risk that after 2 or 3 years they'll be sent back to their country? No. So it will become more and more difficult for people, I think, to come to the UK or indeed to the US for professional opportunities. And this will have negative impact on the economy, and this will have negative impact also on the idea of Britain and America's open societies that draws the best from the world, right? There was a time when the best engineers in India, the best engineers in Africa, in Europe, wanted to go and work in the US because they knew they would be appreciated there and they could shine and they could exercise their talents. Now they don't want to go to the US anymore because A, they're afraid they're not going to get a visa even if they get a job, and B, they don't find it a welcoming environment. So where do they go elsewhere? Well, maybe they go to China now because China comes to them and offers them visas. Or if we're lucky, they come to the EU. But it's a very fraught moment for everyone, really.
I agree. This is what the world needs to understand. I mean, once again, I am a believer in legal migration, which is a great way to say it. I do believe everybody should follow the law and not be illegal. However, it puts a country at a disadvantage if you decide to shut down your borders And you're spot on that China, people like China and North Korea and Russia and others, they're taking full advantage of what's happening in the UK and the US when it comes to immigration issues. So the smartest and the brightest who did see America and the UK as great opportunities, they're now going to China or being sponsored by China to go to another country. So the world, all these policies that are being created in these two countries are being proposed by reform, for example, in the UK, are really going to put these countries at a disadvantage, and people need to understand that. So you always need to look deeper at these issues, and not just consider them on the face value. Let me ask you this: why did you come to the UK originally? What was your impetus to leave France and go to the UK?
Because I love the English language, I like British culture, and I came to study here. And then I ended up, meeting people here. My girlfriend is British. I ended up getting a job here, and so life takes you in a certain direction. And that's the case for most people who are immigrants. They either do it because they have to, or because they pursue whatever opportunities life takes you in. And the tragedy, for instance, of Brexit in the UK, which means that the UK has left the European Union, is that young people in the UK used to have the right to be able to go and live in any European country. Okay, they no longer have that right. Then I would need to apply for a visa. So they're being deprived of potential, life moments and friendships and jobs and careers and just life experience.
No, I agree, and it's something. So, sadly, we're running out of time. But I do think that immigration. When we talk about the immigration, we talk about death penalty. I mean, these are very important things to talk about as a society. But we, as a society as a whole, I think need to wake up and just take a deep look at ourselves because where the world is heading on these issues is very scary. The whole society, I would say, is becoming more narcissistic. I hate to say it that way, but we're heading in a really bad direction globally, and it's very concerning to me. Anyway, Theo, thank you for being with me today. I greatly it's always a pleasure. You look great today as always.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with me, Dane Waters, with Around the World with Dane Waters. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you guys again next week. Thank you very much.